In the previous lecture, we looked at how you define creativity and how this creativity can come from you in different ways, thinking about the way you think, whether it's a nature versus nurture approach and how that works. As I stated, one of the challenges was that historically we saw it as a gift from God, a spark, a magical moment. But the reality now is that we believe that by establishing a creative environment, giving people the right tools, and working in different ways, we can develop levels of creativity. You may not invent something brand new, but you can certainly be creative in how you go about things. And that's what we're going to look at today, is understanding how we can develop creativity into people that perhaps wouldn't necessarily see themselves as a creative genius already. One way to develop creativity is to start thinking about the stimulus that you require for it. We believe there's two different approaches. There's an internal set of sources and an external set of sources. And how we attach these or how we look at these can be important. Now, this is a business creativity course, so we're not talking about painting a picture unless that's your business, and we're not talking about writing a song unless that's your business. We're trying to locate it in the idea that how we can do creative practice, but also boost our business through profitability, cost reduction, all of these sorts of approaches. Being able to creatively find ways of reducing costs or creatively finding a business model can be more powerful than coming up with a new flavor of soft drink, as we've mentioned earlier. So before we think about products and we talk about models, and we will talk about strategic creativity in the next set of lectures. For this, we're just going to think about, from a business point of view, how can we develop creativity and where can we find it? And as we've stated here, there'll be internal sources for creativity for a business, and there will be external sources of creativity for a business. So the internal sources are probably things that you already are aware exist inside organizations. The first is a research and development. This is where the company invests money in people's time to review products, to review ideas. Some companies are incredibly famous for their R&D approaches. So 3M give 10% of the time for anyone to start looking at their work. They can work on anything they want, and it doesn't matter or doesn't have to show a commercial impact. The idea behind this is that it creates a flow of ideas inside and outside the organization that can be used. And also, ideas that we think of now, we might not recognize could be money makers, but they might be money makers or ways to make revenue in 5 or 10 years' time. So interestingly, the concept of Wi-Fi was invented as a theoretical idea back in the 1970s by researchers in Australia. But at that point, they didn't know how to use it. So all Wi-Fi now actually pays a royalty to Australia because of Wi-Fi use. So sometimes you come up with ideas without a solution yet. So a company can do R&D, and also they might specify how much money they put towards it or how much of their turnover they put towards it. Shareholders like companies putting money towards research and development. The next approach is looking at engineering, examining the products, the prices, the processes, the supply chain, all of this. But from an engineering point of view, taking a logical, linear approach to it. How can we reduce cost by perhaps changing the way that things work? Is there a way to reduce quality in it? When I used to work for a big company, one of the things we did is something called value engineering, where we would take a product that was successful and see how we could reduce costs of that product. So maybe using slightly less salt or using slightly less sugar or substituting one type of ingredient for another. And that was a mechanism of using a logical process to try and find creative solutions to cost approaches. We might be creative about how we go purchasing things. Do we need to buy loads at once, or can we source them in different places? Can we put it out to tender where people trade and see how that works? So again, thinking about how we purchase stuff might be a creative solution. How we produce our goods and services can be creative. Do we have a factory? One of the things we've seen now is that people are remotely based. Can you be cheaper? Can you be more creative if your team comes from across the globe? So again, when I worked at a big company, we had global teams. So you might be working in a team where you had someone in Sao Paulo, someone in Houston, someone in Paris, and then someone in London. And you'd all be working on the same project. And of course, you had time differences. But we can be creative in our production approach as well. Marketing and sales, that's another good way internally of identifying creative approaches. Is there an easier way to sell things? Can we bundle it? Are there different models in what they do? How we market it, can we change it? And marketing's really interesting when you start looking at levels of creativity. And we're not talking about advertising necessarily, because that is a certain subset of marketing within itself. But creativity and marketing, product, price, place, promotion, people, process, all of those sorts of things can be a valuable tool in how to do it. And sales as well. We're seeing this idea now of products as a service or software as a service. These are very different and creative approaches to how things work. So that's internal, and that's looking at what an organization can do for itself. But the truism is that not all the cleverest people work for you, and other people outside have different ideas. And that's something else that you need to look at. And this is where we can start looking at external sources and trying to identify different approaches in what we do. How can we find new ideas, levels of creativity that didn't exist before? First thing is talking to customers. How are they using your products or services? Are they using them in an interesting way? And that can be a real challenge in what happens. Suppliers, do they have any creative tips or uses or different approaches? We're seeing things now where plastic bottles for water are disappearing, and we're seeing cardboard coming in as a Tetra Pak alternative. Another stimulus for creativity for your organization might be competitors. Just because they're doing it a certain way doesn't mean you can't. So competition and understanding what they're doing and why they're doing it can allow you to do things successfully with less risk of failure. So horizon scanning and understanding what is going on in the marketplace is very important. Often we spend far too much time just looking at what we do and less time worrying about the marketplace. We might have consultants, because consultants can often offer up really interesting ideas and really interesting approaches to things. They might be consultants in certain areas, or they might even have patent consultants, or they might work across international boundaries. So they take an idea that's been successful for, say, in Taiwan and see whether it will be successful in Scotland, and understanding the cultural expectations that go with this. So talking to consultants can be a really interesting one. And obviously the other one that we like is the universities and research institutes. Part of the role of universities and part of the reason they are taxpayer funded is to come up with future ideas. Most people that teach at universities have PhDs, at which point they've created a unique piece of knowledge that no one else has. We offer PhDs, so we're creating this new knowledge through creativity. So how do we view the world? How do we do it? And we're moving into areas such as knowledge transfer partnerships, where we take ideas and we share them with industry so they can get benefits out of them. So all of these external sources can offer really interesting approaches to developing creativity for any organization. As mentioned previously, this creative approach is not just about coming up with ideas. It's about linking it to outputs within organizations and within successful businesses. And therefore, there are three things that all organizations will be looking for. And this is when it comes to creativity or developing creative approaches or solutions that might happen. These are the important three things. The first one, is it desirable? So is it something that we really want to do? Just because we can, does it mean that we should? And that's really important. Does this allow us to increase our revenue? Does it allow us to drop our costs? Does it allow us to enter a new marketplace? All of these approaches. You might be looking at it through the lens of the Ansoff matrix, where you can take an existing product into a new market, and that by that approach, you create a different source of revenue for your organization. So the first thing is it desirable? Is it something we want to do? The next thing is it feasible? So the idea of feasibility is, can it be done? And that's the reality of you might desire for a brand new approach to happen, but really, can we do it conveniently? Is it easy to do? This is the approach. So, is it something we really want to do? Is it something that we can do it? Because if there's a huge investment cost, then yes, we might be able to. But if it's a technology that perhaps doesn't exist yet, it might be desirable to do that, but it isn't feasible. So, for example, from a university point of view, it might be desirable that we have full on virtual reality lectures, but at the moment it's not feasible, mainly due to technology costs and all of those sorts of things. And then the final one is about viability. And is it viable? Viable is the idea of, do we have to do it? It's our ability to survive. Do we need to do this? So it's really taking desirability and feasibility and then saying, if we do this course of action, is it viable for us? Do we need to do this as a different approach? Will it make us money? Will it save us costs? So desirable is, do we want to do it? Feasible is, can we do it? And viable is, should we do it? Should this be an approach that we engage in? So we've talked about this link to whether it's desirable, feasible, and viable. And we come back to the concept of creativity, and we need to think about creativity is the start point for innovation. And this is where we take a slightly different turn. We're now talking about this idea that we can be creative, we can come up with new ways of doing things, we can develop interesting techniques that grow revenue or cut costs. But ultimately, it needs to create an approach to innovation. Creativity in itself is perhaps not a valuable commodity for an organization. So I've introduced the concept of innovation there. It's well worth thinking about what innovation is. And innovation has, again, multiple definitions. At this level, at master's level, the idea that there's a unique definition that captures everything is pretty much non-existent. The answer is it depends to everything. It really doesn't matter. So innovation is, well, government says it's exploitation of new ideas. Rogers says it's the process of introducing new ideas to a firm. It's also the systematic practice of developing and marketing products and services. It's the economic impact of technological change. It's new knowledge incorporated into products and processes. What you can take from all of this is innovation fundamentally is the ability to develop ideas or new ways of working or new strategic models and introduce them in a managed way into a commercial entity or a third sector organization that will create change. It's not accidental change. Innovation must be deliberate. And some people make a huge some people identify that there's a big difference between business as usual change, which is just slightly improving something, to fundamental innovation, which is an act where you're actually making a large change to the organization. And that's where innovation sits. And the final part that I'm going to link to is this idea that we've talked about creativity, we've talked about viability, feasibility, and desirability, we've talked about innovation, and we need to sort of almost bring these together. And one way we can bring these together is this concept of entrepreneurship. An entrepreneurship or enterprise or entrepreneurial approach is a growing area of study. A lot of organizations, when they're recruiting for people, they want entrepreneurial mindsets. They want people that will take a risk, will take chances, that will be creative and develop ideas. And what we think about is this idea of an entrepreneur is someone that sets up businesses. Nowadays, what we talk about is something called enterprise, and you'll see a lot of it at the university. We have an enterprise team, of which I'm part of, and it's about how do we get an entrepreneurial mindset for people that are going to work in organizations. And we truly believe that everyone should have this creativity approach. And this model shows that creating an environment, back to the nature versus nurture approach, allows people to focus on inventions, to invite innovation, to spot opportunities, create the ability to be develop the ability to be creative, and then ultimately it can give organizations this idea of competitive advantage. And competitive advantage is just something that you do better or differently to any other person. And that's a fascinating thing. If you can have a competitive advantage in your marketplace and you can do something better or different to other people, you can earn more money. And that's important. In the olden days, we used to talk about sustainable competitive advantage. But the reality is that people copy so fast nowadays that competitive advantage alone is a really interesting point. So developing creativity for an organization includes internal and external. We look at the three factors. We link it back to this idea of innovation. And in turn, we link it to this idea of enterprise or entrepreneurship.